Hey, it's another in real life video. This time probably a bit shorter than the previous one that we had done. This time the topic is what I would say is probably the hardest, the most challenging, or the scariest maybe even part of recording Skyrim videos, or more broadly, Elder Scrolls video at large. Specifically, we'll be framing this as Skyrim because that's sort of like the most recent thing that we wrapped up. Of course, we still do Morrowind Mondays every Monday, and we will be doing more Elder Scrolls and similar situations in the future. But yeah, we'll just be using the Skyrim playthrough as a sort of way of framing what we're talking about. As always, of course, you can write in with other topics for future in real life videos. I do have a working list that I continually add to as I get ideas or as people write in with ideas for things, because eventually I may just stop making these if I run out of ideas. Who knows? That said, hopefully one idea a week ought to satisfy, ought to be enough. Otherwise, I don't know, maybe I'll just steal ideas from somewhere, right? maybe I'll just steal, right? Maybe I'll just steal stuff. Anyway, the hardest part of doing Elder Scrolls Let's Play videos, as it pertains specifically to my channel. This is not something that broadly reaches necessarily to other channels, but it definitely applies here, and it is sort of a unique thing that we do specifically for Elder Scrolls videos. That would be the cold open. I guess if you haven't really watched any of the Elder Scrolls videos I do, specifically the playthroughs, the Let's Plays and stuff, you might not be aware. So at the beginning of every Elder Scrolls related playthrough video, because I'm such a huge fan of Elder Scrolls stuff in general, at the beginning we do a cold opening, which is about, I always try to keep it less than a minute, and it is just a snippet of part of the roughly 50 minutes or more, sometimes less, of the oncoming, incoming sort of video, right? Just something that happened during it that I found particularly funny. On the outset, that doesn't sound so scary. That doesn't sound so difficult, right? But the truth of the matter is, for me at least, it is something that sometimes I would worry about. And probably not for a good reason. It's just something that you kind of uncontrollably will just have not a great deal of anxiety over, but just a small amount of anxiety. So this video really not going to have a big, thorough takeaway or driving point or call to action or whatever, right? Just sort of an insight to the process and all of that, and before we get too far removed from the Skyrim playthrough. What makes it so difficult is those two qualifiers, right? Going into making the Elder Scrolls videos. When I first started doing the videos, long time ago now, I don't even know how many years, 5, 6, 7 years ago, I started doing Morrowind Mondays and the Morrowind Mechanics video guides. I decided I wanted to have this cold opening, this cut into the title and all of that as sort of a way to grip people into watching. Whether or not it's successful, I'm not sure. The difficult part of that was finding something that I thought was funny and that was under 60 seconds that I could fit in. If it's over 60 seconds, it starts to drag on. I think there are a few instances where if it's been something that I thought was particularly super duper funny or whatever, or I thought was really weird or clever or something like that, sometimes I would run a few seconds over 60 seconds, but I think far and wide those were very rare instances whenever it happened. Also, what made that sort of time constraint issue even more challenging is that, unlike, for example, how we do YouTube Shorts, I try to leave the video footage part mostly unedited. When it comes to the audio, I'll sometimes scramble around the audio to sort of get to the punchline or to whatever a little bit quicker, so that way the opening takes less time. And of course, humor is super subjective. How many times has it been the case where, like, I will have edited the opening for something, it's something that I think is really funny, but the consensus from the viewership is that this other moment was way funnier. Humor and stuff like that is incredibly weird and difficult, and it's very personal, right? Whatever you find funny is extremely personal to yourself. And of course there is stuff like general mass appeal, but even going into that, there's shades of it in that you find one thing a little bit funnier than the other, right? And your own personal experience and lived experience sort of influences that preference. Especially during the early periods of Morrowind Mondays, in Volume 1 of Morrowind Mondays, I use that to sort of reinforce the idea of me just chilling out about whether or not it's super duper funny. And I'm pretty sure even in Morrowind Mondays Volume 1, I remarked on this at some point or another in a comment. A lot of people will go in with the understanding, whether or not they're conscious of this understanding or not, but a lot of people are very understanding in that they're like, yeah, there will be just openings that I don't find as funny, but probably others will find as funny, right? Like we said, the personal preference. A lot of people acknowledge and recognize that, whether or not they're doing it consciously. And that's something that I would eventually take into account so I wouldn't be so worried about whether or not the opening is hitting in a way that I want. Now, one of the other challenges with this is if I do decide to record ahead for whatever reason, like I'm planning to be busy during that period, or just any reason I decide to try to get ahead on recording a video or whatever, right? Like is the case with the Starfield videos, right? I'm fairly far ahead of the videos that are currently coming out because I'm just enjoying playing the game so much and I want to keep playing it, very much unlike what was the case for very much of the Skyrim playthrough. Though, that said, Starfield may eventually reach that point, right? Sort of as we get deeper into it, when we're like hundreds of videos deep or whatever, right? At some point, that fervor may reach more of a moderate level, right? A more normalized level, similar to how it was with Skyrim. Regardless, the difficulty of that, of recording ahead, is that sometimes you just forget where something funny happened, right? Sometimes you're recording it and you can't just be like, oh, something funny happened right there. I'm just going to go write down or something in my notebook that something funny happened there, because that totally kills the vibe. It totally kills the mood of whatever's going on. Whenever I would go back to edit it, sometimes it would be a struggle like, oh God, I do remember something really funny happened at this point, but I can't remember exactly where it was in the 50 plus minutes of footage that we've got. Sometimes I would just be sitting there for a while, kind of scrubbing through the video, trying to figure out, where is this or whatever, right? I remember this happening. And sometimes there were a few occasions where I just couldn't remember, right? So I went with something a little bit easier. Like we said, sometimes people will remark, oh, this should have been the opening. This was really funny. It would have worked so much better as the opening. But for whatever reason, I couldn't find it. I couldn't manage to get it to fit in 60 seconds or less. Or maybe it was just at a weird point in time in the video, like too close to immediately following the opening itself. But for whatever reason, sometimes it's just difficult to find where it is in the video and clip it out. So you settle for something a little bit easier, right? If there's a very simple, like slapstick comedy moment, those tend to work very well for the opening, I think, because when the stick gets slapped, that's just a great point in time to immediately cue the opening music and cue the title cards and whatnot. And that leads into another instance where, personally, if I were doing something different about the Skyrim playthrough, I would have actually changed around the way in which I displayed the opening title cards. With Morrowind Mondays and the Oblivion playthrough, there was a unique way in which it was presented, in that as soon as the music cut on, as soon as something, the punchline hit or whatever, it immediately cut to the title. With the Skyrim playthrough, it immediately cuts to Skyrim, right? A title card that says Skyrim, which was very intentional originally. It was, my openings are very heavily, obviously, and I'm pretty sure I go so far as to say in the playthroughs themselves at some point or another, that they are inspired by real-world comedy shows. In the case of Skyrim, the Skyrim opening is very heavily and directly inspired by the openings to Barry. Highly recommended, but they open with the title of the show. So whenever there's just a weird moment, or oftentimes like a comedic moment, it cuts immediately to that music and to the gigantic text in front of the screen, it just completely takes over everything, and it just says Barry. And sometimes that works out really well and really funny, right? But even in the case of that show, it's not every time that they have it show up to where that even lands at a particularly funny moment. Sometimes it's something more somber, something different. With Oblivion and with Morrowind, the openings were super inspired by It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which does do that, where it opens with that sort of classical music with the title card, and that, I think, I prefer. Granted, if you're watching the videos as they first come out, the title is usually already known to you when you go to click on it, right? But if you're watching it in a playlist, right, you're just auto-playing through, and that text pops up, sometimes it catches you unaware, right? Sometimes there is a moment for it to actually be part of the joke, part of the punchline itself. There's a certain kind of ironic opening that you miss out on, right? Wherein it's like, oh gosh, I don't know if there's going to be a guy inside of this place trying to kill me. And then, bam, instantly cut to the opening where it says, there's a guy inside of this place who's going to try to kill me. Like I said, it doesn't hit as well if you're watching the videos as they come out. But if you are in a playlist, sometimes it does actually hit pretty well. Sort of the way I see it is for shows, like I said, with Always Sunny, if you're just looking through on like a streaming service or whatever, you will see the names of the episodes, right? Their opening title card is the name of that episode. So you can get a similar situation there where sort of the opening gag is slightly spoiled because you have seen ahead of time the name of the episode which you're about to watch, right? It works better if you're unaware of it. But hey, it just kind of happens, right? It's just another vector for which something funny can be done. Now, in a similar vein to all of that, on the channel we have done other sorts of weird openings like that. The biggest one that comes to mind are the openings that we did for Fallout New Vegas, which were sort of framed sort of like the recaps that we now do for at the beginning of every video, which we'll probably touch on that more again as a future micro topic or whatever. The opening of New Vegas is a recap. It's the first time that I ever scripted any of the playthrough videos. I completely scripted the openings, and those were even harder to do and more time consuming to do than the Elder Scrolls openings, for the openings that we did for New Vegas. Although there wasn't a need to have something funny happen, it was far more time consuming to script it out to fit in roughly that same time frame, because the opening it always played the same song and took up roughly the same amount of time. So whatever I said during the recap had to be roughly that same amount of time. I had to get B-roll to play in the background during the footage, and whatever I said, regardless of how much or how little happened, there had to be effectively a certain amount of words or even syllables during that opening. Otherwise, I'd be just running through it trying to speak really fast. And in some cases, that was the case, right? It was a very strict, sort of regimented way of doing it that, although I thought worked pretty well, for the amount of time invested, sometimes it would take me an hour just to collect B-roll, just to properly script it out and say the openings to that. So ultimately, the amount of time that it took to accomplish all of that was just really not worth it, in my opinion. That's, I think, everything about why I do the Elder Scrolls videos, the Skyrim, Oblivion, Morrowind Mondays, why they're all the way that they are, why they all have that sort of cold opening. That has actually really helped out with regards to making YouTube shorts, which will 100% be a topic for future videos, because effectively I had already been, for years, making YouTube shorts as the openings to these specific videos. I've been doing it forever. It just made it so ridiculously simple. I got incredibly lucky with that. Hopefully this was like a good enough explanation. That's why we did for Elder Scrolls. That's why we did what we did for New Vegas in a sense. And that's why we don't do whatever it is we do for the other videos. Starfield, for instance, doesn't have the cold openings. It especially is the case that I don't know anything about Starfield lore, really. Whereas in the case of Elder Scrolls, I know a pretty decent amount about it, so it's easy enough to riff on the lore and make a goofy joke or whatever, or riff on like the characters that you're familiar with, the world and all that. When it's a new game and a brand new IP, you don't really know any of that stuff, so it's way harder to riff on any of it. It's way more difficult, and whether or not you'll be able to do it every single video becomes even more, I don't know, anxiety-inducing. Frankly, I'm surprised that I've been able to get away with it as much as I have been. I can't believe that the Elder Scrolls videos so far I've been managing. Anyway, thanks so much for watching this weird little in real life video. Expect more other weird little in real life videos covering similar topics, sort of behind the scenes stuff, sort of covering my own thought processes, and covering any other questions or ideas that folks write in about, right? Like I said, I've got kind of a working list on my computer. Whenever, if ever, you have an idea for it, feel free to write in. I can't guarantee that we'll do them all because, you know, maybe some will be too personal, or some will be stuff that I can't talk about with regards to YouTube or whatever, right? It would break terms of service. Stuff like that. Anyway, until next time, please take care of each other.